What's up guys, it's Josh from Cubitechie, and today I want to do a quick video showing you guys how to install Arch Linux. Okay, so Arch Linux is a different distribution of Linux. It's independently developed, and the distribution strives to provide the latest stable version of most software by following a rolling release model. The default installation is a minimal base system configured by the user to only add what is purposely required. And this is one of the reasons I like Arch in Linux, because you could build this system from almost from scratch and install what applications you want on the OS. And one reason I started using Arch is because when you install the other distributions like Ubuntu, Manjaro, Linux Mint, or whatever, they typically install a lot of the packages that they think should be in a good distribution, which is fine. You know, some people have a great eye for putting different applications together or different programs together to make a great distribution. But one thing about Arch is you can install everything from ground up. The only thing you'll have on the system is the base Arch distribution with no extra software on it. And you can piecemeal everything together and install and create your own desktop based on the way you like your system to be set up without having to worry about extra applications installed that you may or may not use. So you typically have a lot of freedom in Arch Linux, which is what made me gravitate to using the distribution. So as I said, I wanted to go through and show you guys how to actually install it and get a system up and running. Now I'll install Arch Linux in VirtualBox, and this is one thing I recommend people to do when you're trying to install Arch Linux. Don't just hop in there and wipe your hard drive on your laptop and attempt to go through the installation on your hardware without trying to install it in VirtualBox. I recommend everybody do that. This one thing I did when I first started with using Arch Linux. I started off by installing Antergos, but that project has since been abandoned. But I went through and installed Arch Linux like a couple times before I actually tried to do it on my hardware. And by getting that practice or whatever, some of the issues I ran into when I was attempting to install on my laptop, I was able to figure out and fix. So that's a good rule of thumb. Whenever you're trying to install Arch Linux, or if you've never installed Arch Linux, make sure you practice in a virtual machine. Even if you're coming from Windows, just install VirtualBox or use VMware and just run through the installation in a virtual machine. That way you're not breaking your system. And also, if you plan on wiping the hardware, and I know most people, if you're trying to install Arch Linux on your hardware right now, you understand the importance of backup. So just make sure you back up your system, back up your stuff when you're doing an install. Now, one thing with Arch Linux, let me show you this right fast. They have a great installation guide, and we'll be using this throughout the video. I just wanted to pull it up so you guys can actually see it, but I'm going to follow this step by step and walk you through the whole process of actually installing it. And all you have to do is go to archlinux.org and select wiki, and they'll take you to wiki.archlinux.org, and then scroll down right here at the top. It says installation guide. So this will guide you through the whole process of installing. You may have to click on a couple of links that take you to other pages in order to handle certain things. Like for instance, I know I'm gonna pull up the grub page so you guys can see it later on when we get to that step. Okay, and one other thing I want to show you right fast. This is basically how you download Arch Linux. You just click on the downloads tab from the home page. You'll see it at the top. It'll say downloads. Just go there, and then you can download the BitTorrent link, or you can actually find a repository closest to you. I recommend you find one that's close to you. I mean, the ISO is only like 600 and something megabytes, so it shouldn't take long if you have a pretty good internet connection. But if you don't have good internet connection, then you want to click on one that's close to you, and they have a lot of servers out here that host the ISO. So I'm in the US. Let me show you guys. I'm gonna go down to the United States, and I always go to Arizona because that's close to me. I'm on the West Coast. I'm pretty sure it's something in California. I just always click on the Arizona one because it's right at the top. But that's pretty much it. You just click on whichever one is closest to you, and then just download the ISO. And since I already have it downloaded, let's go down and get to the install. Okay, so I already have VirtualBox up and running. So let me go down and create a virtual machine. So I'm gonna just name it Orch Linux. As you can see, it already selected Orch Linux. I'm gonna just put Orch, and then I'm gonna get this thing like 4 gigs, and then hit next. And we want to create the disk. I'm gonna use a VDI, dynamically allocated, and I'm gonna give it like 20 gigs, which is fine. I'm gonna delete this right after I complete the install, so it doesn't matter. And now let's go into the settings, and I'm quickly showing you how to set it up in VirtualBox. I have plenty of videos on using VirtualBox, so just check it out. It's not that hard to use, but one thing I'm gonna do is go in here and change the processor. I'm gonna give it 2 cores. And then the display, I'm gonna bump the display up, even though it's all gonna be command line. Enable 3D acceleration. And actually, let's go back here. Yeah. And then let's go down and add the ISO. And so basically that's equivalent to you sticking or writing the ISO to a USB drive, or writing it on a CD and sticking it into the computer. And then also I like to change my networking. I always change my networking to bridged so it can get its own IP address. And then press OK. And now we're good to start up the VirtualBox. So let's go down and double click on it. All right, cool. So the system is booted up. I went on and fixed the screen so you guys can see it a whole lot better, zoomed in on it. First thing you want to check and make sure you have internet connection. And we could do that by just typing ping. So ping google.com, press enter. And as you can see, we have internet connection. And the way to stop that is just Control C. That'll stop that command. Okay, and just make sure you're following along in the Orch wiki. I'm going step by step. It'll be kind of hard for me to switch back and forth just to show you each step, but I'm gonna just type them all in so you guys can follow along with me. But the next command is to actually verify that the system clock is accurate, and you do that by running a simple command. It's time date ctl set dash ntp to true, and press enter. And that was pretty simple, but we could check it by doing time, and sorry, I hit tab, ctl status, press enter. And if you look at it, it says system clock synchronized. Yes. So I think that's basically what we did, was just synchronize those clocks. And once that's done, we go into partitioning a hard drive. And some people use different partitioning tools. I always use fdisk. That's what they recommend. Orch wikis recommends fdisk or ported. You can use ported as well. And I know there's cfdisk or something. I never really used that. I've always been comfortable using fdisk. It's pretty simple to follow, so I'm gonna go down and type that in. But actually, the first thing you want to do is run fdisk -l, and this will list out the partitions. They actually give you the device name, and what we're looking for is the first one that says disk, and then /dev/SDA. That's the disk that we want to work with, because that's our 20 gigabit hard drive or virtual hard drive. The other one is a loopback, and that's associated with the live disk. So just ignore that. So now that we know the disk name, now we can go in and actually run fdisk against that disk name. So fdisk dev, and then SDA. We press enter. This will take us into fdisk. It's a very simple utility to use. I don't know why people are afraid of it, but it's not that hard to use. It gives you all the commands. If you type M, as you can see, the first option or the first thing it says right there is M for help. So if you hit M, that'll tell you all the options. And the first option we want to run, if you go down to the bottom where it says, if you look down at the bottom, and I wish I could move my mouse so you guys can see, but where it says create new label, the third one down is create a new empty DOS partition table. That's what you want to select. That's going to create a DOS partition, which is pretty much the default. Some people use GPT, but DOS is fine. So we can type O and press enter, and that'll label that disk as DOS. Now let's go down and run that M again. That way it'll refresh everything in the help menu. But what we're looking for now is N, which is to add a new partition. So if you look under generic, it's the second section down. That's to add a new partition to this partition table that we just created. So if we press N, type N and press enter, it'll ask you what you want to set it up at, the partition type. P for primary, E for extended. We want to use primary. So since the default is P, I'm not going to type the P. I could just press enter. And then this is where it'll ask you the partition number. So whenever you see the partition under the devices, it'll have a 1 next to it. So it'll be SDA1 or SDA2, depending on how many partitions you have. So the default is 1. So we're going to use 1. Now this is where it looks a little funny. It starts the you're basically selecting the size of the partition, and it's actually put in bytes. And the first part of the partition is always going to start at 2048. So we can just press enter there. Now, one thing about this, it explains it right here. It says the last sector. So basically what we're trying to do is, out of that 20 gigabit hard drive, we want to use about, let's say, 18 gigs, and that'll be for our installation as well as our home directory and all that stuff, because I'm gonna put it all on one partition. So I'm gonna use about 18 gigs, and then the other 2 gigs is gonna be for swap space. So if you look, it gives you some examples of what you could use. If you look at this where it says sector, the plus, then / dash sector, and then the plus / dash size. Well, let me explain what the size means. So instead of trying to figure out how many bytes that is, you can convert it to gigabytes. So I already know I want to use 18 gigabytes. Well, you have to use the plus. So if you type plus, and sorry, I typed it in 3 times, but plus 18, and then you have to use the designator that they put there. So they got kilobytes for the capital K, M for megabytes, and then G for gigabytes, and capital T for terabytes. Well, we want to use gigabytes, so 18 gigabytes. So that's the format that you want to use for whatever size you want to set that partition. And if you're only doing 2 partitions and the remainder is swap, you don't have to worry about figuring out these sizes. But that's good right there, and that'll create it for 18 gigabytes. So that's the first partition. Now we have to create the second partition. So if we go in again, type in again, press enter. We want to make this primary as well. And then this one is 2. It will start the next partition at the end of the last partition. So you don't have to worry about converting these bytes or whatever on the last partition, because it'll automatically select it. And then it'll also select all the way to the end of the hard drive. So if you press enter, that created it. And as you can see, is 2 gigabytes. Now the next step, let me go down, type M again, so you guys can see the menu. The next thing we want to do is actually change the partition types. So we only have to change it on one of them, one of the partitions, because the first one, it automatically sets it up as Linux, which is right. The second one, we want to set that up as swap. So we have to change that type. So if we type T, If you see, if you look in the second section, you'll see the T, but that's what you want to type in. So T, and then we want to look at the second partition. And then as you can see, the hex code right there is actually for the hex code. So if you know it off the top of your head, then you can type it in. But I'm pretty sure you don't, but you could type capital L, and this will list out all the partition types. And what we're looking for is 82. So if you look through this and look for 82, you'll see that's the one we're trying to find, which is Linux swap. So now we know the code, we could type that code in. So 82, press enter. Okay, cool. And it changed that second partition to Linux swap from Linux. And that's one thing you want to do with your swap partition. You want to make sure that type is correct. Now let's type in M again, because it's one more thing we have to do in here before we write these changes to the hard drive. So let's press enter. And that last thing we need to do is make the first partition bootable. And if you look all the way at the top, it's the first one. So if we type A and press enter, this will ask you which one you want, which partition you want to be bootable. And we want one to be bootable. And we press enter. As you can see, it says the bootable flag on partition 1 is enabled now. So that's the bootable drive or the bootable partition. Now, the last thing you need to do is actually type W. I mean, as you can see right there, the fourth section down, it says write table to disk and exit. So that's what we want to do, W. So we press enter there. That'll write all the partition information to the disk drive. Now the next thing we have to do is actually make a file system on those partitions that we created. And the command is mkfs. And we want to make that drive ext4, that partition. And if we type in that partition, this will make it ext4. And it's SD. And I'm going to tab it out so you guys can see that both of those partitions are there. So SDA1 is the one we want to use. We want to make that ext4. And it'll go down and write everything to that partition. And the next thing we want to do is make that second partition swap. So the command to do that is make swap. And then we want to select that partition, and that'll make it swap space. And SDA, and we want to do 2, and press enter, and that'll make that 2 gig swap space. And the next thing you want to do is actually turn swap on, and we could type in swap on, and then we select that partition again, SDA2, and press enter, and that'll turn on swap. Okay, so now that the hard drive is set up, we can go down and start the installation of Arch Linux. But one thing we have to do is actually mount this partition to the live CD so we can actually install the OS onto that drive. So we have to use the mount command, and the command is mount, and we want to select that partition, SDA1, and then we want to mount that to the mount directory on the live CD. And if we press enter right here, that'll go down and mount that SDA1 partition to that location. Now it's time to install all the base packages for Arch Linux to that location. And there's a command called pacstrap. It's actually a script that'll go through and install everything for you to that location. So we type it in, it's PACST, and then I'm gonna tab it out, strap. And we want this done at the mount location, which is where our new partition is mounted to. And then we want to install base space, and then we want to install Linux space, and then we want to install Linux dash firmware, and this will install all the base packages for you to that location. So if we press enter here, it'll go through and create and install everything at that location. And I'll speed through this so you guys don't have to wait, but it's basically installing all the base packages. Okay, so now that that's done and we have all our drives set up and all that, this has all the base packages installed in on that partition. So the next thing you want to do is actually generate the FS tab. And the FS tab is needed for when the system boots up, it knows where all the hard drives are. and it'll mount them in the proper location. So you want to generate that now. That's what they recommend in the installation guide, is to actually generate that FS tab file now. And the command to do that is gen FS tab and then dash capital U and then space. We want to point to the mount directory, and then we want to create this file using the mount directory, and it's /mount etc and then FS tab, and this will generate that file for us. So if we press enter, now we have a working FS tab. So when the system reboots, it'll know where to put all those drives and mount them in the right location. Okay, so now that that's done, we can go in and actually configure the new system that we have set up. And we have to use this orch command. It's called orch-chroot in order to get into it. So you basically change into the root account of the new install. And you only need this for the installation. You never want to use this again. It's only when you're installing. So we can type orch-chroot, and we want to change, root to the mount directory, which is our new system. So if we press enter there, as you can see, it changed. Now we're on that new system. You see it says root, it changed color and all that. You're actually logged in as root on the new system. So now we can go on and configure this system. And the first thing you want to do is set the time zone. And the command to do that is we're basically linking to a file that's built into the system, because they have all the different time zones in specific files, and you could just link to them. So the command is ln -sf /user share zone info, and then you want to select your region. This is where you want to select your region. I'm in the US, so it's US, and then I'm on the West Coast, so I'm gonna use Pacific. And then we want to link that to a specific file, which is located in etc directory. So it's etc local time, and we press enter. That actually links to that file. Now the next thing you want to do is actually sync your hardware clock, and it's a simple command. You just run hw clock and --sys tohc and press enter, and it'll sync our hardware clock. Okay, so the next thing we have to do is edit a configuration file. And just so you know, when we ran the base, when we install all those base packages, it doesn't include a text editor. So you have to install a text editor right fast. So now you can use Pacman just like you would if this system was live. So we could type Pacman -S, and if you've been following my channel for a while, you know I use Nano a lot. So I'm going to install Nano. Press Y for yes, and it should be a quick install. Okay, cool. So now we want to go in and set the locale, and we have to go into a specific file on the system and uncomment out something. And I'll show you when we get there. So let's run nano /etc and then locale gen, and this is the generator file, and you want to go in and modify this file. As you see, this is a list of locales that are to be generated by the locale gen command. So instead of going through, I already know mine is US, and I can't highlight it, but it's that line where I had a cursor at. You're supposed to find it down in this list, but since mine is at the top, I always just uncomment here. The rest of it is commented down below. But that's a quick way of doing it instead of going down and finding it, unless you have a locale that's different. Since I uncommented that, we can exit this file out by saving it. Hit yes, press enter. Now we can run the locale generator, and it's locale-gen, and press enter, and it'll generate the locales for us. And it successfully ran, so we're good to go on that. Now the next thing you want to do is go on and set up the host name, and it's a file located under etc that holds the host name. And what we have to do is just go nano, use your text editor. You can use Vive, Vim, whatever, but I installed Nano, so we're good to go. But it's etc and then host name, and press enter. And I want to name this system Kingdom, and press X, press Y to save it, and press enter, and we're good to go. So now that file has our host name in it, and we could cat it out if you want to see. So cat etc host name Kingdom. Okay, cool. And the next thing you want to do is modify the host, and so we need to go into that file, and the command is nano or your text editor. Then let's go etc and then host with a S, press enter. It's already created there, so like that other host name file wasn't created, but this was already created by the system when we install. But you want to put in the host information. What you want to type in first is 127.0.0.1 space, and then we want to put localhost, and go to the next line. We want to put ::1, and I always like to space it out. I don't think it matters, space, tab, whatever, but and then put localhost here as well, and then press enter. And lastly, you want to put your host name here by typing 127.0.1.1 space, and then Kingdom, which is our host name, dot local domain, and then we want to put Kingdom again, and you want to make sure you spell it right. And this is mainly for DNS, and I'll just tab these out just to make a more uniform form, but we should be good there. Press enter, and that'll save that, and we can cat out that file as well. So let's go etc and then host, press enter, and you see it set up properly. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is set a password for the root account, and the command to do that is passwd, and press enter. This will go on and set up a password for it, so you can type in whatever password you want. Press enter, and now the password is set up for the root account. Okay, and now let me clear right fast so you guys can see what I'm doing. But the next step we need to do is actually install Grub, and so we gotta install using Pacman again. So we can go Pacman dash capital S, and we want to install Grub on the system. And this will be our bootloader. So when we boot up the system, Grub will pop up and actually load the system up. So now that we have Grub, the package installed, we can go on and install Grub on the actual partition. And the way you do that is simply grub dash install, and then we want to select the device, which is dev, and then SDA, and we select the main device when you install a Grub. So if we press enter, that'll go down and install Grub. And once this is done, we want to configure Grub, or actually generate the configuration file for Grub on the system. So okay, now that Grub is installed on a partition, now we need to go down and generate the configuration file for it. So the command to do that is simply grub dash make config dash o, and then we want to put it in the boot location. So boot grub, and then grub config dot cfg, and press enter, and that will generate that configuration file for us. Boom. And as you can see, no errors, so we're good to go. Now lastly, before we reboot the system, because we're pretty much done with installing Orch, but one issue I've always had when installing Orch, it doesn't really tell you anything about your networking, but when you restore the system, networking will not work on the system. And so I typically just go on and install Network Manager before I reboot the system. So we can run this command, sudo -s, and network manager, and press enter. And I apologize, not sudo, but Pacman. And I totally forgot the Pacman, but Pacman -s network manager, and press enter. That'll go to install the network manager. Now this'll have your networking, up and running when you reboot the system, so you can start installing all your other packages from there. Pretty much that's it. So let's go on and reboot the system. So the first thing you want to do is actually get out of this the proper way. And what I mean by the proper way, you have to get out of chroot first by typing exit, which is fine. And then the next thing you want to do is actually unmount that partition. This is what I've always done. This is what they recommend in the Arch Wiki, is to unmount that partition from the mount directory, which is a good idea to do anyway. So unmount it. That'll unmount that partition, and now we can reboot the system. And actually what I'm going to do is shut down the system. And the reason I'm going to shut it down, because I'm doing this in VirtualBox and we have to remove that disk. Okay, so I rebooted the system. When I'm bringing it back up, I might have to make this virtual machine a little bit bigger again, or I might make it bigger itself on my screen. We'll see. Yeah, okay, cool. So now we have a working Arch Linux install. And as you see, the name, the host name is there, so it's Kingdom. So we can type in our root account and our password to our root account and press enter. And now you can go in on and install a desktop manager as well as all the applications that you want on Arch Linux. Like I said, it's a base system. And let me go on and test networking. Let's go system. Well, actually, let's go IPA. And let's just see if we have an IP address. And we don't. And right now, the device is down. So let's run that system CTL start. Network manager, and press enter, and that will actually start it. And then also once you start it, let's enable it right now. That way when we reboot the system, it'll restart that service. So let me see, I'm not sure if we have internet connection yet, but let's see. Yes, and we do. So if we ping google.com, should have internet connection now. So that's one big thing I had an issue with when I've installed Arch in the past. When I was first getting into it, installing Arch, I always had issues setting up networking. So I started including that in my installation process. And they don't really tell you that in the Arch Wiki when you're installing it. So you have to kind of write that down or note that down when you're going through your practicing on doing the installing, like VirtualBox. Just write that down in your list of things that you want to make sure you do before you reboot the system, because you won't have any networking and you won't be able to set up a desktop environment or any of that stuff. So that's pretty much it. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. If you have any questions, leave a comment down in the description below. And of course, keep it techie.